How's going guys, welcome to the channel. In this video we are gonna see, what if Naruto sent to the My Little Pony universe? Part 2. If you wants to see awesome fanfiction like this, don't forget to subscribe. Now let's get into the video. Fluttershy twitched slightly, her mane disheveled and a look of slight fear in her eyes. It was as though the week had passed by in only a matter of hours, and as she looked down to her adopted son, who was already fast asleep, she could only imagine the sort of things she would need to endure to bring this demon under control. If she even could, she shook those thoughts from her head. She needed to be brave, for Naruto's sake. The boy was energetic and fun-loving and all around lovable. And he was depending on her. He didn't know it, but he was depending on her now more than ever. What would transpire within his seal that night between herself, Princess Luna and the demon, would have far-reaching consequences on the boy, some good, some bad, no matter the outcome. Making sure her charge was neither cold or uncomfortable, she began to prepare herself for bed as well. As she looked into the bathroom mirror, she began to think back on the last week. It had been rather eventful. After his revenge on Silver Spoon and Diamond Tiara, the other students in class became abuzz and were so eager to meet the strange human child that they had taken to coming to her cottage after class. While Sweetie Belle, Apple Bloom and Scootaloo were generally the go-to fillies Naruto spent his free time with, he had developed friendships with several of the fillies and colts in Cheerlee's school. So when he began class himself this week, Fluttershy was sure he would have an even easier time adjusting than either of them originally thought. Speaking of the cutie mark crusaders, who were already nearly inseparable, they were now spending nearly all of their free time with the blonde boy. It was actually rather cute. She just hoped he wouldn't get in the habit of needlessly placing himself in danger, which the three fillies tended to do on a regular basis. He already spent enough time playing pranks with his Auntie Pinkie Pie. Granted, they were mostly aimed at each other or teamed together against Rainbow Dash, but still. Fluttershy crawled into the bed she and Naruto still shared. Beginning tomorrow, the addition to her cottage would finally get underway and the human child would get his own room. Not that she didn't enjoy letting her adopted son sleep next to her. He had a habit of snuggling into her in his sleep, wrapping himself under her wings in a manner that the Pegasus found adorable. But it would be nice, and she was sure Naruto would agree, for the blonde to have his own space. Despite herself, she fell asleep more focused on what Naruto's new room would look like. In the field that was her dreamscape, Fluttershy was disheartened to find the Princess of the Moon was already there, waiting for her. The Pegasus was hoping she had perhaps forgotten. I hope you are ready for what is to come. You must steel yourself. Just remember that he cannot harm you while I am around. Fluttershy shuddered, but nodded. Luna's horn began to glow, opening a rift in the dreamscape, motioning for the element of kindness to enter first. The first step tingled somewhat, but the feeling dissipated shortly, replaced by awe and intimidation. Before her was a rather large, nearly castle-like mansion. Seeing the princess pass her by and move toward the open door, she hesitantly followed, trying to hide behind the larger mare. The inside of the mansion was actually very impressive. Very tastefully decorated, though the artwork was a bit unnerving. Strange images of what she could only assume were adult humans, as well as paintings of strange animals, many of them with more than one tail. As they progressed up the stairs to the next floor and down the hall to the open door at the end. Walking in, Fluttershy swallowed with an audible gulp. Seated on a large chair was the demon, masquerading as a blood-red alicorn. Smirking, his wings unfolded, revealing a rather impressive wingspan, before he swooped down and slammed into the ground before the now shaking Pegasus. Ah, fresh meat, he chuckled, before turning toward the glaring princess. I take it I'm not allowed to eat this one. Sure, it was a joke, but all the same, Fluttershy let out a squeak and ducked behind Luna. Hahaha, he laughed. At timid one. Not that I'm complaining, but why exactly did you bring the mother here? Are you attempting to play on my sympathy or emotion? Are you even sure whether I have either of those qualities? The way he spoke caused a shiver to run through not just the timid Fluttershy, but Luna as well. It was rather menacing, more so than the demon normally sounded. So, he continued, summoning the chessboard from the floor. Why are you here? I assume you brought this Pegasus here to at least attempt to find a good side for you to get on. Actually, she's here to keep you in line, Luna replied, getting a snort in response. Her? He asked. You think this frightened little nothing can control me? Even with her element of kindness, what do you think she could accomplish? Luna glared and stepped aside, revealing the cringing Fluttershy, who again began to tremble as QB stared at her, that bizarre smirk ever present on his face. Tell me, what exactly can you do? Gathering what courage she could, she looked up to meet his gaze. Luna watched as the Pegasus near her tried her best to stand up stronger, but she did notice a slight tremble in her legs. I believe she might surprise you. Fluttershy stared into the creature's red eyes. She stared at many beings in the past, but none made her fear more than the one before her. But despite that, she met his stare. Without realizing it, she stepped forward. Luna guessed that was to see if the beast would back down. Instead, he raised a brow, but matched the hard stare. To him, he had a brief flashback to before he was sealed in Naruto. Fluttershy kept up her gaze. Her eyes widened, and her stare got even harder than she thought possible. She knew this wasn't a normal creature from Everfree Forest that would easily fold to her stare, but she had to try. For her son. The mother's love, QB decided to speak, not even breaking the stare. How interesting. His smirk widened. You think a little cage would hold me? One day, Naruto will cause ultimate destruction. It's inevitable. Would you still be by his side? Protecting a human child that could be so much more than a human. When the time comes, I will enjoy watching this world break. Fluttershy felt herself almost tearing away from the stare. She wanted to snap at him. To tell him that he was wrong. She wanted to believe that even QB could change. That was why she was here. To see what the beast within her son was all about. And now, she felt she knew why he was sealed away. But, she was the element of kindness, she could change him. No, she needed to change him. Luna watched the exchange. Well, QB's exchange. She was surprised that the pink Pegasus pumped up her glare, but it didn't matter, QB just stared back. Half bored and with a smirk. She briefly wondered how long this could even last. One had to give out. She felt something. It was like there was water flowing around her. Luna's hair defied gravity and gently began to float upwards. She glanced around and didn't see anything. Until she looked at her companion. Fluttershy was still locked in the stare, but a red substance had started to crawl near her. And one look at QB again, she realized what it was. By allowing him greater freedom, he had found a way around the seal's protective presence. Luna jumped into action, leaving ripples in her wake. Fluttershy stared. Not realizing what was happening around her. The red substance formed a tie-like appendage and launched forward. 3 of them. She didn't notice them as she was too focused on her task. As they neared her, they shattered into red shards that flew into the air. QB didn't break the Pegasus's stare. Well, that was surprising. Fangs poked from his lips as Fluttershy finally backed down and looked at Luna in surprise. Who's keeping whom in line? How dare you attempt to force me under control? The alicorn body he had adopted began to glow bright red before erupting, expanding furiously and retaking his original shape. The house around them crumbled to dust, and bars once more separated the ponies and the demon. You're interesting, Pegasus. But you are no Kushina, certainly no Madara. Luna, surprised that the demon himself had restored the prison bars, picked up the names. She would have to remember them. They could prove useful later. But now I am tired, QB announced. I'm sure you can find your way out. If you wouldn't mind restoring the mansion, since the seal prevents me from doing it myself. It's the least you can do after this ridiculous stunt you just pulled. There it was again. That question that nagged at her. QB was powerful and fast. And with the seal protections downgraded, he could have wiped them both out of existence. But instead, he had replaced the bars. Put them back, preventing himself from doing so. But why? Within the mind of the demon, a fury unimaginable was building. Though he should have expected such a move from the princess, he hadn't expected it so soon. And it was infuriating. He had to get back at her somehow. He couldn't kill her, or the meek Pegasus, for a multitude of reasons, which is why he had restored the cage to hold back his anger. To be honest, he actually felt a tad bit of respect for the cowardly pony, attempting to induce a form of control over him. And despite the antagonistic nature between himself and the princess, she had been excellent entertainment, but perhaps she had outlived her usefulness. It was sad, as she was actually pleasant company. It was nice to be able to have a conversation and not be bound in chains during. However, it was time to get serious. He was not going to take such an attempt at controlling him, failure though it was, lying down. And again, it wasn't a bad attempt, and the fact that the fearful Pegasus had been the one to try it was actually kind of amusing. As he slunk into the shadows of his cage and returned to his new alicorn form, the prison vanished and was replaced once more with the manor house that Luna had originally created for him. Oh yes, the alicorn would feel every ounce of his fury. The 2 had already gone, and as he stared into the flames of his fireplace, his dark gaze glinted with anger and mischief, his frown reforming into a sadistic smirk. He resisted the stare. Rarity nearly shouted upon learning what had transpired in the seal. Fluttershy nodded, noticing the worried looks on the faces of each of her friends. This was bad. Fluttershy could easily quell the rage of the fiercest beasts in the Everfree with her stare. Make them back down. Sure, the QB was supposedly a demon, but they had expected some sort of reaction. Princess Luna says that QB will probably be pretty angry, but she doesn't expect he'll try anything. She says he knows he can't afford to. If he breaks their deal, then he loses the better conditions and the company, Fluttershy replied. Which was a relief. If he decided to take control of her son, she honestly had no idea what she'd do. There had to be some way to deal with a demon that didn't involve killing Naruto. But until they could find it, they were forced to play the game QB had designed. And with the elements, the princesses, and the stair all useless, the demon fox had all the cards. You said he mentioned 2 names, right? Twilight asked, intrigued. When you tried the stair, he compared you to 2 others. Fluttershy nodded. Yes, she said simply. He said I didn't compare to them. Which means that whoever these 2 are, they do know how to control him, Twilight announced. If we could maybe find them, they might be able to show us how. Rainbow Dash looked skeptical. But wouldn't these 2 be in Naruto's world? She asked. Plus, this demon is really, really old. How can we know if they are even alive now? For all we know, they could be long gone. Rarity nodded, but still had to point something out. Well, that is true, someone was able to seal that beast into that sweet child, she said. Surely someone in his world knows how to deal with demons like this. But then the question is, how do we get to Naruto's world, and how do we find them when we get there? This final thought by Applejack brought a questioning look to the face of Princess Luna, who was just outside the library, listening to each of them speak. After last night's debacle, she wanted to make sure Fluttershy had made it through, mentally unscathed. Fortunately, the pink-maned Pegasus was tougher than she looked. Spreading her wings, Luna took flight. Easily crossing the town in moments, coming to rest just outside the school, she used a spell to render herself invisible from the eyes of the students. She peered through the open window, looking at the fillies and colts within. But more importantly, she looked on with interest and deep concern for the one human in the group. He was different, no doubt about it, and yet he was so similar to the other children, she had to wonder if he wasn't perhaps a pony in another life. But then, children rarely held prejudices, didn't dwell on differences. They had to be taught that. Suddenly, the QB's words to Fluttershy echoed in her mind. You think a little cage would hold me? One day, Naruto will cause ultimate destruction. It's inevitable. Will you still be by his side? Protecting a human child that could be so much more than a human. They could not allow such a creature to distort such a purity. But why did he hate so much? One must be taught evil to become evil. Did the same hold true of demons? The nightmare forces had once ensnared her mind, corrupting her. What made the QB the way he was? What was she to do? She needed more information. She and her sister had learned about the world in which Naruto had come from and a few things about the boy himself, but she needed more. She didn't know anything about the QB. She didn't know why he was the way he was, how he came to be she didn't, even if he had a name besides QB. Information was the key, especially in a dangerous game such as the one she was now immersed in. In having Fluttershy join her the night before, she had maybe made a bad move, but she had not really lost anything. If anything, she had gained some of that precious information. Now what she had to do was follow it. And Luna hoped desperately that the fox would not force her hand. She didn't want to admit it, but she was beginning to notice certain similarities between the demon fox and herself. Though both wielded great physical power, they each preferred to use their minds to get what they needed. And if perhaps QB had been benevolent at some point, the similarities became more apparent. However, there were severe differences as well. While her evil was spawned by the nightmare forces, gaining root in her mind and amplifying her inner darkness, QB seemed to be evil from sheer cynicism. The fox trusted nobody. Discounting his attack against Fluttershy, he had used no more than scare tactics to intimidate others. To test them. And his words to the Pegasus asking whether or not she would stick by her son the way it was worded and said implied that Naruto would be turned, but he never said anything about being forced or controlled. He had gone on record as saying that it was the humans he had hated, but still had insisted that the child was an innocent. Was the demon so cynical that he believed the blonde would fall into darkness on his own accord? Or was this merely confusing misdirection tactics from a vile being of hatred? Knowing that dwelling on the subject would leave her only further in madness, she attempted to put the thoughts out of her mind for now. She decided that it was time Cheerlee's class got a bit of excitement. A visit from a princess would definitely qualify. And then Princess Luna came, and we got to play games outside with her for the rest of the day. Naruto announced excitedly as he and Fluttershy crawled into bed. I love school here. It beats the dumb old academy big time. Fluttershy smiled at her charge, knowing that he was at least enjoying himself here. Of that, she was grateful. Okay, I know you had fun today, Naruto, but you need to settle down now. Tomorrow is a new day and you need your sleep. Despite obviously not desiring to sleep, he complied, slipping under the covers. Now, I'll be in shortly. Try to get some sleep tonight, okay? Okay, acknowledged the blonde. Nodding, Fluttershy began to leave, but was stopped when she heard something unexpected. I love you, Mom, the young boy said. Fluttershy froze mid-step, hearing those words. Once they had finally processed, she turned and rushed back to the bed, kissing the blonde on the forehead. I love you too, she replied softly, smiling brightly at the boy who beamed back. He called me mom. She practically screamed in her mind, more excited than she thought she would be. This was a milestone. She loved her animals, but this went beyond that. Despite everything, this human boy was well and truly her son. She knew of course that was the plan from the get-go, but that wasn't what inspired her joy. This was not about some plan. This was about more than simply caring for some animal, as it was at first. Not even bothering continuing her preparations for bed, she crawled in with her child, wrapping her wing over him as both blanket and embrace. She need fear no demon tonight. Right now, it was her and her son. And she hoped beyond hope that it always would be. Outside of Konoha's ninja academy, a large area was blocked off from both student and civilian. Though still, many an onlooker stood absolutely shocked and mystified by the strangeness and beauty that lay before them. Several shinobi moved around, following direct instructions from the white-haired toad sage. From placing seal tags and scrolls across the area and scrolling seals directly into the earth itself, the group had made a massive array. Every now and then, the seals would glow with a purple aura in a pulse-like rhythm, which Jiraiya noted. He also noted they weren't collecting near enough energy to try and reopen the door that Naruto had been lost behind. Unfortunately, it would have to do. His seals were just taking what was there, and there wasn't nearly enough left after this long to fully collect. But with what he understood about the seal holding the QB in his godson, he could in theory focus his own chakra into them and have them act as a filter, of sorts, converting his chakra into a match, or at least a close approximation, to whatever form of power this was. Naruto's seal could purify QB's demon chakra and convert it into his own. He had to hope he could do the same. Overlooking even Jiraiya, stood Sarutobi, his eyes hardened, his Hokage's hat shadowing his gaze. This had to work. If Naruto was alive, he needed to get him back. Who knew what fate had befallen the boy? For once, the council seemed to be on his side, the shinobi side due to overwhelming like for the boy, the civilian council, because they were certain it was the Nine Tails plotting something and the elders well, they couldn't let the idea of someone else taking possession of the village's Jinchuriki slide. Despite the reasons, next to nobody was fighting him on this, and that meant he could devote his entire attention to it. Alright. Clear out. We're gonna try it. The shinobi nodded at Master Jiraiya's orders, stepping clear of the massive array. And get the civilians out of here. Once his commands had been met, the seal master began channeling as much chakra as he could, beginning to flow it into the numerous seals, which glowed blue as his energy began to activate the array. But it wasn't taking on the purple hue that the other energy did. And already he was beginning to tire. This was taking a good deal out of him. Deciding on a different approach, letting the seals try to convert his chakra, he instead tried to use what he knew about elemental chakra and tried to get a feel for the differences in the two energies. This was going to be much harder, as he had to try and mold his chakra into matching the secondary power consciously, rather than the seal doing so automatically. The power that had sucked in Naruto was strange, though. He couldn't put his finger on it, but there was something wrong. Sensei, you need to feel this. Sarutobi raised his brow as Jiraiya ceased flowing chakra into the seals, motioning for the Hokage to take his place. Tentatively stepping forward, the third crouched and began to feel the energy they had captured. Jiraiya hadn't been joking. He wasn't sure how, but this power was very familiar to the aged shinobi, and he knew why. Immediately, he called on his Anbu to retrieve for him some chakra paper. It didn't take long for the Anbu to return, and Jiraiya placed the paper atop the seals they had used to collect and store the strange, lingering power. Once more pouring his power into seals, Sarutobi let out the barest amount of the collected energy, letting it flow into the paper and confirming the Hokage's suspicions. The paper began to wrinkle, before splitting into three parts, one part bursting to flame, one crumbling to dust, and the third and final part becoming sogged. Jiraiya's eyes widened. So that's why it felt strange. Whatever this power was, it wasn't chakra. But that being said, this strange energy seemed to somehow mimic each nature of elemental chakra at once. Sarutobi luckily was more advanced than his student in this case, having mastered all of the element natures. Creating 4 shadow clones, each taking a place around the seal array, they again tried to focus their chakra through the seals. But this time, each clone attempted to convert the chakra into one of the elements, with each clone's element different than the others and the original. Sweating profusely, the biggest issue for the Hokage was not converting his chakra to the elemental chakra, but rather merging them all together. Usually, this required a bloodline, but by separating himself into his clones, he could manipulate it much easier. Still though, it was no easy feat. But it was beginning to work. The elemental natures of the chakras began to merge into the captured power, causing all the seals to glow with a purple aura, brightly. Sparking in an unnatural, almost ethereal way, warping the air above it, distorting it, the purple glow took on form, looking like a horse, in a way. But then, things got decidedly out of hand. The aura went from purple to white, blindingly white. As white lightning arced out from the large seal array, each of the clones were struck, dispelling them instantly. As Jiraiya rushed in to try and grab his sensei, the both were engulfed in a blinding light, which exploded and sent them flying. Each crashed into the ground, rolling and skidding, as the light they had created somehow collapsed in on itself, disappearing. As the Hokage and the Toad Sage began to lose consciousness, neither saw what was left behind. If you looked very carefully, right at the exact point of implosion, you would see that anything behind it distorted, as if light itself was being bent around the singular spot. Twilight gasped as her horn began to glow for a moment before returning to its normal state. What was that? Spike asked, stopping his dusting of the library shelves at seeing the flash of magical aura. The purple unicorn blinked owlishly for a moment. I'm not really sure, maybe it's still reacting to Naruto somehow. But it hasn't done that in weeks, Spike pointed out. Why would it start up again? Twilight looked deep in thought, unable to come up with a good answer, or at least, an answer that didn't scare her. But deep in her mind, she had to wonder if her horn was perhaps reacting to something the blonde's prisoner was trying to do. After all, she and Naruto had a magically formed connection to one another through her world bridge spell. Maybe she had connected to the demon as well. She shuddered, but tried to put the thought out of her head for now. I don't know. I think I'll head over to Fluttershy's to pay him a visit. You stay here and finish cleaning up, alright? She asked, getting a salute from her assistant as she trotted out the door. Turning, the baby dragon sighed at the sight of the massive pile of books laying on the floor. As she drew near Fluttershy's cottage, she began to calm down. The boy in question was out helping his mother feed the numerous animals that inhabited her cottage and the surrounding areas, under the watchful eye of Fluttershy herself. Calling to her friend, she watched a pink-maned pony jump in surprise. Giggling nervously as she approached, Twilight got low to allow her surrogate nephew to climb up and take Spike's usual place on her back. Sorry about that, Fluttershy. It's no problem, the yellow Pegasus replied with a smile. In fact, I'm glad you're here. I was actually going to come ask you something. Twilight quirked an eyebrow. Ask me what? Well, Fluttershy began. Naruto's been doing fairly well in school, but there are some areas he finds himself needing a bit of help with. Looking to the boy on her back, Twilight noticed him furrowing his brow and frowning. Twilight had to fight to keep from giggling at how cute the child was. He groaned. I can get it on my own. I'm sure you can, Fluttershy responded, never losing her quiet but firm tone. But just because you can, doesn't mean you should have to. As Naruto crossed his arms and began grumbling, Twilight was actually surprised by what Fluttershy said next. Now none of that, young man. Pride is one thing, but sometimes, asking for help is something we have to do. Twilight had never heard her friend sound so stern before. It really did sound motherly. I'd be happy to tutor Naruto, Fluttershy, Twilight said with a bright smile. The Pegasus pony's words reminded her of the time Applejack had all but insisted that she would completely harvest all of Sweet Apple Acres on her own. And that turned out to be a disaster. Maybe she'd get Naruto to go along with it if he heard that story. What exactly are you having trouble with, kiddo? Naruto again grumbled, but after a look from Fluttershy, he quickly answered. Well, I can talk and understand just fine, it's reading and writing that I'm having trouble with. It's way different than how we read and write back in the village, he said, and Twilight nodded in understanding. Well, that makes sense. Well, I'm sure I can help you out with that and anything academically associated. Despite his child pride taking a hit, Naruto uttered a small thank you to the unicorn, leaning in and resting his head in her mane. So how are you both doing? She asked. Absolutely wonderful. Fluttershy beamed. He is a handful at times, but I love having him here with me. Right here, you know, Naruto protested at the handful comment, earning giggles from the mares. Stepping forward, Fluttershy nuzzled the face of her son. Naruto, would you go and make sure Angle Bunny is eating all his food? You know how he is when it comes to finishing his plate before going to play, she asked, and the blonde nodded. Okay. Naruto said, sliding off of his surrogate auntie and rushing off to find the bunny rabbit. Turning back to her friend, Fluttershy smiled. Now then, what are you doing here, Twilight? I thought you normally correct the shelves in the library about this time. Twilight just smiled nervously. Well, my horn started reacting to something again, she began, seeing Fluttershy's eyes widening and looking off in the direction the small child had dashed off to. I'm not sure if it has anything to do with him or the demon. I just stopped by to check and make sure nothing serious was going on. By the looks of things, we have nothing to worry about. Well, Fluttershy replied. If it wasn't Naruto, what else could your horn possibly be reacting to? Twilight shook her head. I'm not sure, but all the same, keep an eye out. If this is the demon's work, we'll write to Princess Luna. Fluttershy gulped nervously at her friend's statement, but nodded. Hearing several crashes from the cottage, the two turned to see Angel dash from the front door, a badly beaten up child chasing after the white rabbit. Back here. he shouted, trying to rush after the bunny, but as he passed the two mares, his shirt was gripped in his mother's teeth, holding him back. He looked up sheepishly at Fluttershy, who simply rolled her eyes. Letting go of the blonde once she was sure he wouldn't run off. "It's alright, Naruto. I'll take care of Angel later. Besides, you should go clean up," she said. "I believe you made a promise to go over to Sweet Apple Acres later to help out for tomorrow." Naruto's eyes widened. He almost forgot. Twilight raised a brow. "What's tomorrow?" she asked, as Fluttershy did her best to brush the dirt off the blonde boy and get his clothing to look less disheveled. "Tomorrow is the start of cider season," the Pegasus replied. "It's the biggest time of the year for sales in the apple family. The money is what helps them get through the winter, and it's a big deal around here. Their apple cider is practically famous around this whole area. And I'm gonna help them out," Naruto announced, smiling brightly. "Apple Bloom and I are helping Granny Smith watch the stand and serve the cider." He seemed so excited about it. The girls giggled, despite the serious topic they had been discussing just previously. Naruto rubbed the back of his head with a smile before climbing onto Fluttershy's back, and the three began to head toward the apple orchard. As they headed across town, the two had heard a rumble and turned to the human child, who looked sheepish as he rubbed his stomach. "Did you not have breakfast yet?" When he nodded in the affirmative, Twilight shook her head. "Where do you and Pinkie put it all?" The blonde just shrugged. He couldn't help being hungry all the time. So, they stopped at Sugar Cube Corner to grab a snack from Pinkie Pie, who was always prepared to cater to the human boy's sweet needs, to which Fluttershy was thankful. She was thankful for all her friends, all the help they were giving, all the affection they were sharing with her adopted son. Of course, she could do without Naruto's aunties Pinkie Pie and Rainbow Dash, encouraging his pranking habits. Heck, the two of them had gone so far as to take the blonde under their wing. And Silver Spoon and Diamond Tiara were his usual targets. Granted, this did help him get accepted much easier in school. And despite his inability to have a cutie mark as a human, he was officially an honorary cutie mark crusader. Sweetie Belle even made him a cape rarity was apoplectic, unfortunately, but she forgave the crusaders eventually. Fluttershy was brought back to the present at Pinkie Pie's shout of camping party. The pink mare managed to pull a tent from behind her back, from out of nowhere. Naruto, Twilight, and Fluttershy stared at their friend. "What?" she said. "I keep it in case of tent emergencies. And the start of cider season is definitely a tent emergency." She just smiled and the three shook their heads. "I need to go pack some snacks and then go get in line. Hey, I bet there were lots of other ponies who would want to join in." With that, she had dashed out of Sugar Cube Corner, forcing the three to duck beneath her as she shot through the air, looking more like a Pegasus pony than an Earth pony. The kunai sailed through the air, entering the pocket of distorted air, disappearing for a moment before sailing out the other side. A rock followed. As did many more random objects thrown into the strange hole ripped right in the empty space. The battered Jiraiya and Sarutobi were throwing several objects into the void, watching them disappear and reappear in space and time. "Why is it just spitting these back out?" asked the Anbu member. "The objects that enter are obviously going somewhere, but why are they coming back?" "I think I can explain," Inu Jiraiya replied. Turning to the crouched toad sage, the Anbu and the Hokage saw him scrawling out 3 circles in the dirt. 2 small, and between the 2, a larger one. Pointing to the first small one, he spoke. "This is basically a space-time jutsu, and much like any space-time jutsu, there are 3 layers. These layers are as follows. The first circle here is us, our starting point." Scrawling a few lines to connect the first small circle to the larger center one, he continued. "The other smaller circle represents our destination point, our exit. The larger circle represents the path carved through space and time itself. It is a place beyond them that we or the object travel through to instantaneously cut from the start point to our destination. The summoning jutsu works in this manner. But we haven't reopened the exit point that Naruto had traveled to. Just the entry. So in other words, an object goes in and gets momentarily stuck, unable to find an exit, and bounces back out through the same point it had gone in." The explanation seemed incredibly simple. Kakashi knew that it was far more complex than that, but still, it was a very good way of explaining the principle. "So we try again," he said. "And hopefully manage to pierce through to the exit." A hand on his shoulder and a shake of the head from the Hokage shattered his thought. "It isn't that simple," replied Sarutobi. "Space-time jutsu are very tricky. And we're not simply trying to break an exit. We're trying to break the proper exit open, the one Naruto traveled through. But as long as he's been gone, the scar left by the jutsu will still be there, but finding it and forcing it open from the inside will take a lot of time and experimentation with the strange chakra that originally activated the jutsu. However, if the user of this jutsu knows we're trying to follow and have gotten this far, they may in fact show themselves, trying to seal this door. The new voice called the attention of the three shinobi to a heavily bandaged man walking toward them. And this gives us the advantage, Sarutobi. The Hokage frowned slightly. Indeed. We can prepare for their arrival and all the while continue to try and find a way through. We need to get Naruto back even if it's only his body. Danzo grunted. Uzumaki should never have been let out of our sight. As the Jinchuriki of the QB, he is one of our most valuable assets. If any of the other villages learn of his disappearance, we will be seen as vulnerable. The elder announced. While Sarutobi didn't agree with Danzo's reasoning, at least the old warhawk was fighting for the same goal as he himself. The safe return of Naruto Uzumaki to the village hidden in the leaves. By any means necessary. And he wasn't sure if it was because whoever responsible had discovered his status as Jinchuriki of the QB, or perhaps his parentage. Sure, Naruto was the spitting image of the fourth, but children for years have emulated their heroes. Most would assume it was Naruto's choice to revere the Yondaime. Either way, either reason was a grim choice, as the former would likely mean Naruto was being trained as a weapon, and the latter meant he was likely to be killed. He hoped Naruto was just taken through dumb luck, but he knew hope was a dangerous thing in times and situation like this. He stared into the pocket of non-space, bending light around it as though it were some orb of distorted wind. Through that light and out the proper exit, Naruto raced around, catching apples as quickly as he could. His first cider season could be his last if he and his extended family lost this contest. The other day, two unicorns, named Flim and Flam, had arrived in town and made a lot of boasts, claiming higher efficiency and quality than even the apple family. This evolved into a contest, with the winner being named the only one allowed to sell cider to Ponyville. And Naruto wasn't going to let the apples lose their orchard. At the moment, he, Apple Bloom, and Pinkie Pie were all catching the falling fruit, desperate to catch up with the Flim Flam brothers' super speedy cider squeezy 6000. Patching a rock with his foot, Naruto cried out as he fell forward, flinging his apples into the air at Pinkie. Luckily, her tail twitched, letting her know they were coming, allowing her to catch them. Growling, Naruto got back up, grabbing his basket once more. Taking a deep breath, he tried to remember what he had been taught about chakra in his short time at the academy. He hadn't been taught how to tap into it yet, but knew that it could make a ninja very strong and fast. And if they could tap into their chakra, then so could he. Reaching deep within, he opened his eyes, determined to win. Within his seal, the QB, unseen and unheard by the boy, decided that if the boy wanted access to his chakra so early, then who was he to deny his container? A subtle burst of his own demon chakra, keeping care to remain undetected, forced Naruto's own to the forefront, allowing him to utilize it. Whether he could control it. Well, once his plans played out, he very well may be teaching the boy very soon. He just had to persuade the Moon Princess to follow through with his plan. Whether she knew it or not. Chakra began to flow, and Naruto could plainly feel it. It wasn't tight and controlled, but he could feel it in his muscles. His fellow apple catchers stared at him as a slight blue aura permeated the air around the boy, extending maybe half an inch off the blonde skin. So transfixed was she that Pinkie Pie didn't even notice her tail begin to twitch as the apples began to fall. But Naruto, whose reflexes were heightened due to the permeation of chakra flowing into his muscles, moved twice as fast as he had previously, dashing to Pinkie and jumping on her back, his basket held high. He heard a small oof from the mare as he landed on her, but she did congratulate him on the save. By this time, the other ponies had taken note of his increase in ability, and Fluttershy looked at Twilight nervously. Fluttershy, has this happened before? The unicorn asked, getting a shake of the head. No, but it can't be the demon, she whispered back. His power looks and feels different. When it's visible, it's bright red. Twilight nodded, sighing in relief. If chakra was anything like unicorn magic, the color of its aura was not something that could just be changed. From what Celestia had told her, Naruto could eventually tap into and channel his chakra, but it hadn't been expected so soon, nor was it known what the difference was between the demon and human variations of the energy. Look at him go. Cried Dash from the treadmill operating the cider press machine. That kid is a natural athlete. Yep. Agreed Big Macintosh, himself quite impressed by the speed the small child was now using to dash from one point to another. His baskets were twice as full now as they had been getting filled, meaning he was also much stronger for the chakra running through him. This greater speed and strength allowed him to gather more apples quicker, which meant they arrived at Rarity, who was examining the quality, much quicker. By the time the contest time had expired, all the ponies had dropped, exhausted. For Naruto, this was far worse. The small boy had not only tapped his chakra at such an early age, but made constant use of it for nearly 20 minutes. Most children didn't do more than feel out their chakra the first time and didn't learn how to utilize it for practical use for weeks. Naruto felt so drained, he didn't even manage to stay awake for the end of the contest. The boy managed to walk over to Fluttershy, climbed atop her, and promptly passed out, his small form unable to handle such strain yet. He would be told when he awoke that while the apples hadn't made the most cider, the town had ruled that the flim-flam cider wasn't worth even a single bit and the two had been run out of town in humiliation. He was also informed that every pony had seen him use his chakra. He beamed with pride when Fluttershy and his adopted aunts all showered him with praise. Twilight, now that he had his chakra, wanted to help him learn to use it, both for his sake and for the sake of knowledge regarding humans. Rainbow Dash was envisioning taking the role of his personal athletic trainer. Pinkie Pie decided to plan a congratulations on finding your chakra party. Applejack told him that after the great job he did, that she would gladly take him on as a hand at the orchard whenever she needed the help. Rarity decided to make him a new outfit inspired by his performance, telling him he had to have new clothes to train. And his mother even made him another batch of raiment, which the two shared with the other ponies. All in all, it was a good day. From inside, QB sipped his tea, smirking. Only a matter of time now. Only a matter of time. Achoo! Flecks of snot and spit flew in various directions throughout Fluttershy's hut, scaring the animals within and without as the small child reflexively shot up in bed and let loose a mighty sneeze. Fluttershy sighed as she wiped his mucus-covered face with a wet rag, much to his unspoken annoyance, and looked at her son with a look of pity. The boy had caught what appeared to be a very nasty cold and was looking worse for the wear. Unfortunately, the only things the doctor could prescribe were a mild cough medicine and some sleeping medication. Since Naruto was a human, none of the doctors or nurses at the hospital felt comfortable giving him any actual pony-specific medicine. Though she couldn't blame them, she knew she'd need to visit Sakura at some point. The zebra could likely come up with something safe to quash the blonde's cold. Oh dear, she muttered as the small child curled into a ball beneath the blankets. Would you like me to make something to eat? Naruto shook his head, worrying Fluttershy. The blonde was never not hungry. She gently placed her lips to his forehead and was discouraged and alarmed to feel just how high Naruto's fever was. She paced nervously. She didn't want to leave the boy alone, but she also knew that this was likely not an ordinary cold and her boy was getting worse. A knock on her door caused the timid mare to leap, but she rushed to the door anyway. Maybe it was one of her friends, come to help. She hoped it was. Then they could keep watch on Naruto while she went to fetch Sakura. She knew the zebra could and would help the little blonde human. She opened the door to her salvation, Twilight Sparkle, standing like a majestic goddess on the other side. She gave the Pegasus a look of pity. She had spent many a night doting on a sick spike in the past. And unlike dragons, nobody knew anything about humans well, except Lyra Heartstrings, but with her, it was all speculative. Twilight had seen Lyra in passing many times, but hadn't really spoken with her more than a few words. When Naruto had been introduced to the townspeople at his party, Lyra's eyes had gone wide as dinner plates and Bone had begun grumbling about an apparently lost bet of 50 bits. Shaking herself back to the matter at hand, she barely registered what Fluttershy was saying. It was so fast it was like talking to Pinkie Pie. She managed to make out getting worse Sakura watch him. Despite missing several things, she figured it was something about Naruto's condition worsening and asking if she would stay with the little human while she went to see Sakura about it. The unicorn nodded in agreement as Fluttershy shot from her cottage like a rocket. Twilight shook her head. That Fluttershy rushed off herself to see Sakura instead of asking Twilight herself to venture into the everfree forest, spoke volumes about how much Fluttershy genuinely cared for the boy. She hastily made her way to Naruto's room, a little heartbroken to see the little ball of energy sick in bed. She at first thought he may have been sleeping, but he groaned and turned over to lay on his other side, his eyes meeting hers and a weak smile flashing for a second. Hey Naruto, Twilight greeted quietly. How are you feeling? The blonde was silent for a moment as another chill ran through him and he curled up tighter. Not sure, he groaned. I never got sick back in the village, so I don't think I've ever felt like this. His musings were punctuated with another large sneeze and Twilight found herself instinctively putting up a shield. At least when Naruto sneezed, he didn't send bursts of fire at her. The first time Spike ever got sick almost cost her her mane. When the blonde shivered more, Twilight conjured an extra blanket over him while simultaneously fluffing his pillow and tucking him in. The extra warmth seemed to help fight away his shivers. Hopping onto the bed, Twilight curled up around human child while at the same time levitating a book from within her bag. A good book always helped her when she was under the weather. But since Naruto hadn't quite gotten down reading Equish, she would just read to him. Naruto looked at the floating book hovering in front of the two. While Twilight had been helping him a lot with his reading and writing, he still could only make out a few words. Daringdo? He asked. Daringdo, Twilight corrected with a smile. Aside from pronunciation, he was beginning to show recognition of the Equestrian alphabet. But you're getting there. That was very good. Whenever I'm sick, I always like a good story. Would you like me to read it to you? Her only answer was the blonde backing up, snuggling closer into the unicorn. She'd take that as a yes. Naruto was only half listening. Between Twilight's help and getting him comfortable and the additional warmth from her own body, Naruto was beginning to get very drowsy. By the time Twilight had gotten past the second page, Naruto had fallen asleep. Twilight just shook her head and suppressed a giggle. Poor guy was probably up half the night, sneezing and coughing. She gently nuzzled the boy's sleeping face. Fluttershy may have been the one to adopt him, but Twilight knew she was responsible for the boy as well, being the one who had pulled him here. Maybe she was just as much Naruto's mother here as Fluttershy, she thought. The two were magically bonded due to her spell. But for the moment, she was content to be the doting aunt. Mothering the blonde human was doing worlds of good to Fluttershy's demeanor. The normally timid and frightened Pegasus would have been frozen with fear at even setting foot in the Everfree. She just now dashed in without hesitation, for Celestia's sake. All because of the sleeping child before her. Placing the book down, Twilight laid her own head on the pillow. She could use a nap herself, and staring at the passed-out blonde wasn't helping matters. It was for that reason that Fluttershy and Sakura entered the room to the adorable side of Naruto, bundled in his blankets, snuggled into the likewise sleeping Twilight Sparkle, and the mare and boy were snoring in perfect sync with one another. The Pegasus and Zebra looked to one another with knowing smiles, before bursting into giggles. Not only was the sight precious, but Fluttershy made a mental note that the two looked like they could even be related. Twilight Sparkle, open your eyes, Sakura said softly, gently shaking the mare. Out of this bed, it is time to rise. Twilight's eyes groggily opened, and she yawned. Back already? She muttered, lifting herself and stepping down from Naruto's bed as Fluttershy gently woke Naruto. Sakura wouldn't be able to help much if Naruto couldn't communicate what was wrong. Fluttershy came with such a worry, so I felt that it was better to hurry, the zebra replied to her unicorn friend. We raced here within a haste, as Fluttershy said there was no time to waste. The human I had expected to meet when we arrived to a scene so sweet. Turning to the now awake Naruto. Now, young human, tell me how you feel. Whatever may ail you, I'm sure I can heal. You talk funny, was the first thing out of Naruto's mouth, and Sakura let out a hearty laugh, intrigued by the child, taking note that he was very pale, and if what Fluttershy said was true, he was feverish. Turning to Fluttershy and Twilight, the zebra nodded, and the two understood she would prefer them not to be in the room. Fluttershy was disheartened by this, but trusted that Sakura knew what she was doing. The zebra stopped them, however, and they watched Sakura pull some herbs from out of her bag. Use this to make some herbal tea. And when it is ready, bring it back to me. Together, they create a special brew. Excellent for fighting the flu. The flu? Twilight asked. Is it really something so simple? Sakura nodded again. Because his body is not accustomed to our plane, its battle against disease is all but in vain, she said. It made sense to Twilight. If Naruto was to be believed, he never got sick at home. He had a functioning immune system in his world. But here, he was extremely vulnerable to germs and disease. It wasn't really fair. Maybe there was something in the library that could help. Some sort of ward or charm she could create to boost his immunity, since the doctors weren't too keen on accidentally harming the boy should he not take well to pony immunizations. The two went down to begin brewing the tea, while Sakura took out a few more things from her bag. What did Sakura mean when she said you walked in on a sweet scene? Fluttershy just smiled and blushed. Oh, I'll tell you later, the pink-maned Pegasus replied, gingerly tapping her hooves together. Fluttershy Twilight asked, not so sure she wanted to know. What was I doing in my sleep? Well, has Spike ever told you that you snore? Twilight looked taken aback. Why, I do not snore. She said, almost indignantly. Snore, you certainly do, young mare, announced Sakura, now coming downstairs. A trait you and the human both share. We found you both snoring away in time, as true as my penchant for speaking in rhyme. Twilight blushed furiously, refusing to meet the amused gaze of the zebra. How is he? Asked Fluttershy, the worry returning. Seeing the look in her eyes, Sakura waved her off before she could re-enter panic mode. Your son will be fine, don't worry your head. He just needs some fluids, some love, and to stay in bed. Fluttershy let loose a sigh of relief, and while she hadn't really been all that worried, Twilight did as well. The three made small talk as they waited for the tea to brew. With all the chaos of the human addition to Ponyville, the ponies has been quite busy and unable to visit the zebra as of late, so it was nice to catch up. According to Sakura, the herbs she gave them to make tea with were great for boosting an individual's immune system, which would be important until Naruto's immune system adapted. She also made certain to add a bit of something to help him sleep. The blonde human had barely managed to finish his cup before he was out like a light. And as before, he was snoring quite contently. You seem disinterested in my being here. QB quirked an eyebrow at Luna's observation, but otherwise said nothing. Was it not you who wished for a visit weekly? If you do not wish me to be here, I could perhaps come another night. No, QB replied, adamant. I've just had my hands full these last few days. Luna tilted her head, confused, before motioning for the fox demon to continue. I've been having to regulate and boost his immunity. Or would you prefer he be plagued by more than simply a flu? Luna's eyes widened in recognition for a moment. She wasn't aware that the fox could affect the boy's body in such a manner. But then they widened for a much more important reason. It was you who gave the boy access to his chakra, wasn't it? She demanded. We had a deal that you would not interfere with. Don't impugn my honor. QB barked, and to her credit, the Princess of the Moon didn't even flinch. As the most revered and powerful of the Bijuu, I will not have my reputation besmirched. The terms of our agreement was that I was not to communicate with the child or reveal my existence within him. When he attempted to tap into his chakra reserve, tiny though it is, I simply gave it a push. He remains unaware of me, and so our bargain holds true. Luna reined in her irritation at being spoken to like a child, instead focusing in on something QB failed to tell her before. There are others like you? QB just smirked. Not like me, he bragged. But, my 8 brothers and sisters are still quite powerful. Hopefully their containers are less runty than my own. It took a moment for his words to sink in, and the horror they implied caused her to tremble with rage. There are others. Others like you. Others like Naruto. The realization that even more children were suffering the same fate as the blonde, but were still in their world of warriors, being tormented and likely made into living weapons, hit her like a ton of bricks. This was unacceptable. Unconscionable. A dark aura began to permeate the air around her, causing QB to smile. His smile faded, however, when Luna's anger began to rein in, and the aura dissipated. The mare was taking deep breaths, trying to control herself. Something must be done about this. Oh? And who's going to do that? You? Perhaps, Luna said, her wings extending to their full span. To visit such horrors on a child is something I will not allow. Pony, or not. Do you understand now, Princess? QB whispered, circling Luna like a shark. The humans are the real demons. The real monsters getting in close, right in her ear, he finished by saying, perhaps you, the regal Princess of the Moon, should go and teach them a lesson. Luna shuddered, feeling his breath flow over her ear. She knew it was wrong, but part of her demanded that she listen to the 9-tailed fox. The vile humans deserved to feel her wrath visited upon them. QB just continued to circle the dark alicorn, whispering to her, eager to coax her rage out once more. Twilight Sparkle has opened the door. Are you going to deny those poor children the opportunity to live in peace? Enough. Luna demanded, slamming her hoof into the floor hard enough to crack it. I know what you are trying to do, but I refuse to be swayed by the desires of a demon. And yet you were swayed by the desires of a nightmare. Luna's face reddened in rage as she glared at the fox demon, who masqueraded as an alicorn. Why fight me on this? You became the nightmare queen out of pettiness. I simply believed that you could put your hatred to good use. Silence. Luna bellowed again, her eyes glowing wide as her anger began to boil over. Her wings flared and her horn began to glow. I take my leave of you this night. I pray that next we meet, your attitude is improved. In a flash of light and crack of sound, the alicorn princess vanished from Naruto's mindscape. Watching a few puffs of smoke rise from the scorched floor where she once stood, QB smiled darkly, his grin twisted and cruel. Goodbye, Princess Luna, he said, before making his way toward his bedroom. Oh, he continued, looking over his shoulder. And checkmate. His chuckle held a cold mirth as he envisioned the horrors he had just unleashed. Out doing a bit of shopping, Fluttershy had stopped to have a conversation with a few friends, seeing as she had been cooped up in her cottage tending to the sick child. Applejack was watching him at the moment, giving Fluttershy some time to run errands in town, and at the moment, she was having a rather pleasant conversation with a cream-colored pony named Bonebone. So how is the little guy? Bonebone asked between customers. Oh, still sick, Fluttershy announced, and Bonebone noticed just how tired the Pegasus pony seemed. But after Zakura's visit yesterday, he's starting to feel better. That's good, Bonebone announced with a small smile. You know, Lyra hasn't been able to stop talking about him. She's always believed in the existence of humans. But she's never had proof until now. I was a little surprised by that, Fluttershy announced quietly with a yawn. When Naruto first arrived, even the princesses couldn't find anything about him in the royal archive. Bonebone just rolled her eyes. And she never said anything about it. Lyra is imaginative, Bonebone admitted with a blush. And she never mentioned her human obsession in public because I kind of told her if she did, I'd move out, Fluttershy gasped. Yes, I know, it was harsh, but one of us had to be realistic. She wrote her dissertation on a species that, until recently, nobody had heard of. To be fair, I am really glad she turned out to be right. Even if it did cost me 50 bits. Well, I'm glad everything worked out, Fluttershy said after a moment, not noticing the unicorn and dragon pair racing toward them until they were right upon them. At the sound of the frantic voice directly behind her, Fluttershy leapt into the air before ducking behind Bonebon's stand, peeking out to see a rather frazzled Twilight, Spike looking equally panicked. Fluttershy, thanks Celestia we found you, Twilight gasped, slightly out of breath. The princess wants to see us in Canterlot as soon as possible. Eyes shifting to Bonebon, she bit her tongue before saying more. We need to take the next train, so get anything you might need. Twilight, I can't go with Fluttershy announced timidly, ducking below the stand again. I can't go to Canterlot. Naruto is still too sick to go with and I can't just leave him alone. Lyra and I can watch him, chimed in Bonebon. The two element bearers and Spike looked to the cream-colored pony as she continued. I can watch him when I'm not working the stand and given the chance to take care of a human, I'm sure Lyra would drop whatever project she might be working on to help. Oh, I don't know if that's really Fluttershy was cut off when Twilight spoke. Sorry Fluttershy, but on such short notice, you really don't have another option. Fluttershy bit her lips nervously before nodding. Bonebon just smiled. Great, she announced as the two began to run off, raising her voice so as to be heard by the retreating ponies. On my next break from the stand, I'll bring him over to our place, if it's okay. And get some sleep on the train ride. The girls all met up at the train station an hour later, and the confusion was evident on the faces of each of the girls, save the grim look on Twilight's face. Alright, spill it. Why does the princess want to see us all? Demanded Rainbow. Twilight bit her lip before motioning for the others to gather in close. This has to be kept a secret. If word got out, it could create a mass panic. Princess Luna has gone missing. What? The other mares shouted, causing all eyes to move to them. Because of this, nobody seemed to notice the manic chase happening off in the distance, the jumbled mess of ponies rapidly moving and constantly being engulfed in a bright light. Nervously, Twilight shuffled her friends onto the train as quickly as possible. How could she be missing? Dash whispered, causing Twilight to shake her head. I have no idea, the unicorn admitted. And neither does Princess Celestia. But given what last night was, she seems to have a pretty good idea of the cause. Fluttershy's eyes widened in understanding, while the others just seemed confused, so Twilight continued. Last night was Princess Luna's weekly visit to Naruto's demon. The mares looked to each other nervously before Pinkie popped up between them. But wait, didn't we figure that Foxy wouldn't try anything to mess up his deal with the princesses? The pink party pony questioned. I agree with Pinkie, Rarity announced. Granted, I've never met the beast, but it does seem rather odd that he would just break his word. From what I've heard, he seems far better off in the seal now than he did before the princesses came. But he did try to attack Fluttershy when she went in to meet him, Dash countered, earning a quiet eep from Fluttershy. And, he made it clear that he knows we can't use the elements to remove him. But he was pretty angry that we tried to use the stare against him, Fluttershy said, her voice trembling and quiet. I'm not saying that it was right, but sometimes, we do things in anger that we wouldn't do otherwise. Dash's jaw dropped. Don't tell me you're defending that thing, she questioned, her gaze causing Fluttershy to hide behind her mane. No, not at all. I'm not saying he was justified, just that his actions, if he did do something, can be understood as being done in anger, Fluttershy replied, and Dash just facehooved. Leave it to the element of kindness to make excuses for a monster doing horrible things. Let's not argue, y'all, Applejack interjected. It doesn't matter why the fox did it, what matters is finding out what happened to Princess Luna and getting her home safe, lickety-split. Twilight nodded. Applejack is right, the unicorn announced. Once we get to Canterlot, Princess Celestia is going to give us the elements, just in case, and then we're supposed to investigate where Luna could have gone. The others nodded in understanding, save for Pinkie and Dash, who saluted instead. Fluttershy squeaked out something unintelligible, really wishing she had stayed home with Naruto. They began in Luna's room, the place she was last supposed to be. It was there she had entered the dream realm to reach Naruto's mind. Element of magic gleaming atop her horned head, Twilight's horn began to glow brightly. All unicorns leave a magic signature wherever they go. I'm casting a spell to isolate Princess Luna's personal magical signature. Once we have that, we should be able to find a trail of her residual magic to follow and hopefully lead us right to her. The girls nodded as Luna's bed began to glow, a blob-like aura appearing, coalescing from the air. Well, she was most definitely here, Rarity announced, silently wondering what kind of magical prints she had left around Ponyville and shuddered. She knew it was only natural, but that blob, despite its being magic, looked rather unseemly. And fairly recently. I'm not sure on the decay period of alicorns as compared to unicorns, but if I had to wager a guess, I'd say she hasn't been gone long, probably an hour or two before dawn, Twilight agreed, trying to remain focused on the situation as the magical residue began to form a trail from the bed, moving in a thin path toward the window, which still hung open. What now? Pinkie Pie asked. If we need Twilight's magic to find Luna's magic and Luna's magic jumped out a window, how are we supposed to follow it? Dash just laughed before flying at high speeds out the window. The ponies were confused for a moment before Dash returned, pushing a rather large cloud. Still remember that cloud walking spell, Twilight? Within moments, the ponies were soaring through the air, pushed by Rainbow Dash and Fluttershy, Twilight's horn guiding them along the trail Luna had left behind. Luckily, being an alicorn, Luna's magic was stronger, or the trail would likely have dissipated already. It was Applejack who made the next observation. Is it just me, or is this trail headed back to Ponyville? Not just Ponyville, it's headed toward Sweet Apple Acres, Fluttershy noticed. Ooh. Maybe the princess wanted some apples. Pinkie said. But she ate too many and got a tummy ache, and so she fell asleep and hasn't woken up yet. We'll find out when we get there, Twilight said, knowing that while Pinkie meant well, that was likely not the answer. With Dash pushing, even with Fluttershy, the group made great time to the orchard, but it was there they reached a dilemma. Huh? Twilight sputtered, surprise and worry permeating her tone. The magic, the trail just stops. Indeed, the trail they were following had indeed ceased right above the apple orchard. What could that mean, darling? Rarity asked, not quite as versed in the magical arts outside those of her special talent. Ordinarily, I would assume she teleported, Twilight began, pointing to the point where the trail simply broke. That would explain the sudden stop. But teleporting leaves a huge amount of residual magic. If she had teleported, the magic here would have spiked drastically, not simply break away. Girls. So, what other explanation is there? Dash asked, stumped. Well, maybe Princess Luna knows how to conceal her magic signature and knowing she'd be followed, decided to throw any pursuers off her tail, Twilight theorized. Girls. Now what the hey would Princess Luna do a thing like that for? Applejack questioned. It don't make a lick of sense. Unless the demon really did corrupt her and she turned back into Nightmare Moon, Dash announced, only to be met with stern glares. What? She demanded. It's a possibility. Hey. The other mares turned to Fluttershy, who seemed to realize just what she had done, and blushing, hid behind her mane once again. You have an idea, Fluttershy? The pink-maned Pegasus just nodded before pointing down. Dash and the four ponies peeked over the edge of the cloud to see a clearing below, in which the Cutie Mark Crusaders clubhouse stood. You think she's hiding in the clubhouse? Twilight questioned, tilting her head in confusion. Or maybe the Crusaders were trying out for a full napping Cutie Mark, Dash deadpanned. Fluttershy just shook her head. No, it's just this is the spot where the girls first found Naruto, she said. Yeah? Dash intoned. So this is where the little squirt ended up. What's that have to do with the princess? Dash's questioning ceased as a look of panic and horror rushed to each of the mares' faces as they realized just what Fluttershy was implying. Unless Princess Luna used the Rift's car to go to the human world, Twilight squeaked, breaking the silence. Oh, do we really have to do this, Twilight? Fluttershy asked as the group approached the home owned by Lyra and Bonebone. It's time I met this demon, Twilight announced. I want to know what his endgame is. Princess Luna wouldn't have just gone to a different world for the fun of it. She needed to be given the idea from somewhere, and the fox is the only one I can think of who could or would do such a thing. But you've never mind walked before, Fluttershy continued. Are you sure you won't hurt Naruto? Twilight just gave her a reassuring smile. It'll be fine, trust me. As she gripped the doorknob with her magic, Twilight and the others turned to give Fluttershy a knowing look. They knew just how much the little human meant to the Pegasus pony. As Fluttershy looked down, finding her hooves absolutely fascinating at the moment, Nopony saw the massive flash of light that illuminated the doorframe for a split second. Pulling the door open, the six quirked their eyebrows as they looked on at the sight of a full house. Lyra was passed out asleep, lying on her back while Naruto lay on her mint green stomach, also asleep. It was actually rather adorable to watch the little blonde rise and fall with each of Lyra's breaths. Also in the room was Bonebone, who looked somewhat winded. However, the normalcy of such a scene ended there. Also in the room were Vinyl and Octavia, Spike, Big Mac, the Crusaders, and the Apple family dog, Winona, all of whom looked dazed, stumbling a bit as though just struck with nausea. What in the hay are you all doing here? Applejack asked. I came to check up on Naruto, Spike said hastily. Yeah, us too, Scootaloo said, speaking for all the Crusaders. Apple Bloom chimed in next. And Big Mac was just here to walk us home, she said, refusing to look her big sister in the eye. Yep, Big Mac said, a tad nervously, and Winona just yipped. "We came to see if Lyra and Bonebone wanted to go out tonight," Vinyl announced, her shades blocking her eyes from view as Octavia nodded furiously. Yeah," Bonebone continued. "We hadn't had a girls' night in a while," so silence permeated the room as Applejack's eyes narrowed. She knew a lie when she heard one. But she couldn't be certain what they were lying about. Before any more could be said, Octavia cleared her throat. "Yes, well, we'll see you both later tonight then," she said, motioning toward Bonebone and Lyra, the former of who nodded while the latter still slept. Grabbing Vinyl, the two made a hasty exit, followed by the others, sans the residents and the human boy. Glaring, Applejack stared out the window, trying to read their lips, as the makeshift group had a very short conversation outside before dispersing. "I know them ponies are up to something, and I know I ain't gonna like what it is. We can deal with that later," Twilight announced, her horn aglow once more. "Please, be careful," Fluttershy said, unsure of whether or not her words were even heard as Twilight touched the tip of her horn to Naruto's head, her magic easily piercing the walls of his mind. She sighed in relief when Naruto didn't even stir, instead beginning to snore. Hurrying through the corridors and halls, Twilight used her horn to try and find the fox as quickly as possible. Turning a corner, she found him, slamming into the disguised fox demon, falling on her flank as he looked at her with disdain and a twinge of curiosity. Not liking those cold eyes staring at her, Twilight rose, brushing herself off. "You must be the QB," she announced, trying to be as polite as possible to hopefully not draw his wrath upon her. "My name is Twilight Sparkle," he said, beating her to the punch. "I know who you are. What do you want? Why did you enter this place?" Swallowing nervously, a look of determination entered Twilight's eyes as she stood her ground. "Princess Luna has vanished. It seems she's gone to the human world. And this is my problem. Why?" QB asked, though his ever-present smirk told the real story. "Because you're the one who convinced her to go there." The smirk became a wide fang-filled grin now, and Twilight knew she was dealing with a predator. "I may have suggested it." "Why?" Twilight demanded. "You have everything to lose from this, and nothing to gain." "Quite the opposite, actually," QB countered. "I'll just come out and say it. The princess needed to learn her place after what she and the mother pulled." "You mean Fluttershy's stare?" Twilight asked, her confidence beginning to wither as QB sat, looking down on her, like an evil counterpart to her mentor. "Yes," he replied. "And to your previous point, it is I who have everything to gain from this. The way I see it, no matter the outcome of Luna's little romp with the humans, I lose nothing. You see, there really are only 4 possible ways this will end. Either Luna crushes the humans or the humans seal her away as they did me." Twilight's eyes widened in horror at that. Princess Luna being forcibly bound to a human child, her magic wrenched from her to make a living weapon. Deep down in the pit of her stomach, she did not want to believe that that would happen, but looking up at the fox, she realized it was indeed a possibly. And the other two? She was almost afraid to ask, but did so anyway. "Of course, there is the chance she makes it back here in time, in which case, I've still not lost anything." "What do you mean, in time?" Twilight demanded, and that was when QB's grin threatened to consume his entire face. And unlike when Pinky did it, this smile was filled with so much malice, she thought she might actually vomit. "Ah yes, my favorite outcome," QB announced. "If Princess Luna has not returned to meet with me by the end of the night in 1 week's time, she will have broken her half of our bargain, which means you have free reign to reveal yourself and contact Naruto." Twilight squeaked in realization, paling considerably in fear. QB's tail simply broke apart into 9 separate strands that began to swish every which way in his malicious mirth. "Precisely. So this part ends here. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, so quickly like this video for second part of this series. And comment down below your thoughts about this series. And now it's time for me to go, bye."